So my name's Alex Moran. I am part of a larger group, including Zane, Tai, Keon, Carmen, and Lindsay, and we're presenting on the hemp industry in Louisiana and its economic impact on Louisiana should we ever venture in that direction. So as an industry overview, I know most people like myself were unfamiliar with hemp. But what is it exactly? So industrial hemp has a long history with human civilization and was found often near early nomadic settlements close to streams and in well-fertilized areas. Hemp was traditionally cultivated as a fiber source, and most genotypes in the temperate climates had very low tetrahydrocannabinol or THC content. Hemp came to North America in the early 1600s and played an important role in agricultural Hemp came to North America in the early 1600s and played an important role in agriculture during the 1700s and 1800s. By definition, the industrial hemp refers to the strains of cannabis sativa L containing less than 1% THC. Something to keep in mind is that over time there were higher THC content plants, also known as marijuana, that were very similar to hemp types from Southern Asia that were used during the drug trade. Now, what's hemp versus marijuana? Like, how do they differentiate? Marijuana and hemp are different varieties of the same species. Marijuana and hemp are different varieties of the same species. As I mentioned before, cannabis sativa L. Due to the uses of marijuana plants in the drug trade, industrial hemp was linked to its higher THC cousin in the 1930s, thus resulting in legislation at both state and federal level that banned their cultivation. It wasn't until the 1960s that THC was identified and determined to be the psychoactive component that gets its high or gets its person high. Let me start that over. The 1960s that THC was identified and determined to be the psychoactive component that gets a person intoxicated or high. But by that time, or in that time frame, there was no way to distinguish low THC industrial hemp from its high THC varieties, like those used for medical marijuana. When we look on how it's cultivated, it's through seed, fibers, or dual purpose crops using both. And in most developed countries where industrial hemp is cultivated, production is limited to hemp varieties that contain less than 0.3% THC. So when we look into legislation, you do the next slide. So when we look into legislation, the 2018 Farm Bill is what comes to mind. On December 12, 2018, with strong bipartisan backing, Congress passed the 2018 Farm Bill, which was signed into law by the President of the United States the following week. The 2018 Farm Bill amended the Controlled Substance Act and Agricultural Marketing Act of 1946 to address how industrial hemp is to be defined and regulated at the federal level. According to the 2018 Farm Bill, hemp is defined to mean the plant cannabis sativa L, and any part of that plant, including the seeds thereof and all derivatives, extracts, cannabinoids, isomers, acids, salts of acids, salts, and salts of isomers, whether growing or nor, including THC or involved with THC concentration of more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. This definition is consistent with the definition of industrial hemp in the 2014 version of the same bill, which was created to limit agricultural pilot plan. This definition is consistent with the definition of the industrial hemp that was used in the 2014 version of the bill, which created a limited agricultural pilot program regarding research into industrial hemp. So I know you're asking what changed between 2014 and 2018. The 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, paving the way for a wholly legal cultivation, possession, sale, and distribution of the hemp plant. As far as updates, as of December 2019, hemp can legally be grown in every state except Idaho, Mississippi, and South Dakota. Next slide. So what are we looking at as far as market potential? When looking and investigating gross value, the USDA and various land grant universities and state agencies, for example, Arkansas, Kentucky, Maine, Minnesota, North Dakota, Oregon, and Vermont, have conducted several feasibility and marketing studies. More recent marketing reports indicated that the estimated gross value of hemp production per acre. So what are we looking at as far as market potential? In gross value, the USDA and various land grant universities and state agencies, for example, Arkansas, Kentucky, Maine, Minnesota, North Dakota, Oregon, and Vermont, have conducted several feasibility and marketing studies. More recent marketing reports indicate that the estimated gross value of hemp production per acre are increasing, which we will explore in later slides. Total sales in the U.S. hemp industry in 2017 were upwards of $820 million. Within that total, the numbers break down to $190 million for the sales of hemp-derived CBD products, $181 million for personal care products, and $137 million for hemp food products. Food sales were led by the snack food category, and industrial product sales were led by the automotive category. On the slide, you'll see the statistics for the 2019 year in the hemp industry, with the most impressive really being that $344 billion in total global cannabis consumer expenditures, and only taking into consideration the legal and illicit sales of those products. Yeah, that's it.
Hemp is regulated by many agencies, but today I'll focus on the United States Department of Agriculture, as it is one of the main agencies that deal with the mass issues of hemp industry. Under the USDA, hemp farmers must abide by rules such as being licensed under the state or USDA hemp program, not being or hiring a person convicted of a felon, providing the hemp acreage to let the agency know how much is being grown, and etc. But one main concern with USDA is its testing procedures and requirements. Because testing procedures varies from state to state, the laws seem to get a little complicated. For instance, drugs must be tested by a Drug Enforcement Administration registered laboratory, but the USDA realizes that the statistical uncertainties that come with sampling and testing a hemp crop for THC. The plant must have a THC limit of 0.3% or lower. Anything higher is considered a hot crop and must be destroyed. If a crop is above the THC limit, it is considered to be marijuana under the Controlled Substance Act and must be disposed of accordingly. Farmers could accidentally produce a crop that tests over the limit, in spite of their efforts to produce a crop that complies with federal law. Even hemp seeds from 2 geographical regions can produce different levels of THC. There are a multitude of issues that will arise when a new industry emerges. Trying to figure out the best practices opens the door for more questions. For example, issues about financial institutions, crop insurance, and interstate commerce are to name a few. According to the Farm Bureau, hemp farmers trying to work with financial institutions found that banks look at the industry as a great legal risk and elected not to participate in financing the hemp production. There has been a passage of the Safe Banking Act. Congress.gov website describes the purpose of this act is to increase public safety by ensuring access to financial services to cannabis-related legitimate businesses and service providers. However, financial institutions are still cautious of participating in this market. On another note, in order to participate in crop insurance, a farmer will need to certify acreage with Farm Service Agency and identify each field which hemp is grown. Additionally, a farmer will be required to have a contract for the purchase of the hemp before being able to purchase insurance. Hot crops are not considered a covered loss, even if that may be driven by weather conditions. With the lack of knowledge, data, and diversity of hemp, it's hard for the insurance to set it out. There's also an issue in interstate commerce when transporting industrial hemp. While it is legal in some states and at federal level, there are other states where it is illegal. There were millions worth of hemp seized due to the misunderstanding of laws. The USDA has issued a final interim rule that states the states and Indian tribes may not prevent the movement of hemp through their states or territories, even if they prohibit its production. But there is still confusion that the states can still interfere with transportation of the product. The hemp industry is growing fast, but unfortunately, the laws governing the industry aren't moving at the same rate, which will cause the industry and the businesses operating within it to constantly feel on edge. There has been great progress made, but the industry is evolving at a rapid pace.
So we're also going to start to explore a 5 forces analysis. This tool was created by a Harvard business professor, Michael Porter, to analyze an industry's attractiveness and likely profitability, which is something that we really want to start thinking about with the potential growth of the hemp industry in Louisiana. And since 1979, it has become one of the most popular and highly regarded business strategy tools. Porter has recognized that organizations likely keep a closer watch on their rivals, but he encouraged them to also look beyond just their competitors and examine other factors that could impact the business environment. So he identified 5 forces that make up a competitive environment and which can erode your profitability. We will start with barriers to entry as our first one. Threat of new entry is defined as your position that can be affected by people's ability to enter your market. So specifically thinking about the hemp industry, we want to think how easily could other competitors enter into this market? How can you get your foothold into this market or industry? And what would be your cost and how tightly is your sector regulated? If it takes a little bit more money and effort to enter your market, or if you have a little protection for your key technologies, then rivals can quickly enter into the market and weaken your position. If you have strong and durable barriers to entry, then you can preserve a favorable position and take fair advantage of it. So when we're thinking specifically about the hemp industry, there are some barriers to entry. One is that post-harvest, the need for downstreaming processes, especially for dryers and for drying barns, which can lead to a lesser degree CBD oil extractors, is an additional bottleneck in this market channel. These types of equipments and assets are both expensive, which create really high fixed costs, and they have a moderately high level of asset specificity. They are not easily used for anything else besides drying out hemp. Such as farmers who are engaging in the hemp industry, they usually invest in their own drying capacities, either by purchasing a dryer or by building a dryer barn. This assumes that the risk of the market condition will generate sufficient returns to recover their investment. Under these conditions, there's economies to scale, which create incentives for farmers to get big fast, or more likely to contract out processing services to neighboring farms and to increase the amount of hemp they process. The actual entry of the secondary importance relative to the possibility of entry, as Porter asserts, that farms will most likely take a proactive measure to increase barriers to entry, even if those measures lower short-term profits. With limited supplies of input and post-harvest processing capacities, there are strong incentives for both existing farms and new entrants to attempt to lock in these scarce market resources, thus limiting the opportunity for other hemp farmers to access these resources. Plus, by the very nature of this newness of the entire hemp industry, there's little to no history in the US about the relationship between trust and long-term commitments that have been previously established. In combination, these market conditions create really strong incentives for opportunistic behaviors among input suppliers and processors in the form of price gouging, breach of verbal agreements, and other short-term strategies to extract money from hemp farmers. The end result will be low returns for many new entrants who may then choose to exit the industry after only one production cycle.
Mm.
The second step to the 5 forces model is substitutes. So this threat mostly refers to the likelihood for your customers to find out a different way of doing what you do. For example, if you supply a unique software product that automates an important process, many people may substitute it by doing the process manually or outsourcing it. A substitution that is easy and cheap to make can weaken your position and threaten your profitability. The medical use of CBD is really still being researched. In 2018, the FDA approved the first ever legal use of CBD-based drugs, Epidiolex, a medication for certain forms of epilepsy. Additionally, clinical trial work has been researched around CBD as it can be a treatment for anxiety, insomnia, chronic pain, and nearly 30 other medical applications. Much of the hype for hemp focuses on a wide range of potential products in downstream markets that have been produced for processed hemp. So we will look at a table after this that starts to summarize and provide an important reminder of the future of hemp production. Farmers in different regions of the United States are likely to target different downstream products that are relative to growing conditions for their own specific region. So for example, if we're looking at the Pacific Northwest in Montana, we see that the greatest potential in CBD oil markets and its related array of downstream products and uses, while those in other regions are really focused on hemp as a source of fiber for a very different array of downstream products and uses. The potential for hundreds or even thousands of hemp-based products around a multiple product categories, unfortunately, can often overwhelm the underlying economic question, which Porter is specifically trying to identify. When we start thinking about the hemp industry, we need to start asking some critical questions for processors, manufacturers, and other end users in terms of profitability, which profitability is The critical question for processors, manufacturers, and other end users in terms of profitability is not what can I do with processed hemp, but rather when are hemp-based products a more profitable and cost-effective option? The possibility for long-term development of large-scale end-user markets, therefore, will rely upon the development of hemp-based products for which there are few, if any, product substitutes. Two of the most likely candidates are dehulled hemp seeds for food and for CBD oil. With hemp seeds, the general interest is eating well, functional foods, and this new idea of superfoods. This has been a huge trend over the last decade in America. Determining that the hemp seed meets this established consumer preference in a unique manner would suggest significant upside market potential. And some other researchers such as Turney and Small have noted that dietary advantages of hemp seeds and hemp seed oil are quickly gaining traction and acknowledgement within North America, and the sale of hemp seed products are rapidly increasing. Hemp seed has a strong potential to be really a superfood, and with few substitutes, as it offers consumers a food product that is, one, an excellent source of omega-3s and omega-6 fatty acids. Two, it's a plant-based protein with all essential amino acids. And three, it really contains a lot of antioxidants, vitamins, and other nutritional benefits. So as stated, when we are thinking about the impacts of the hemp industry, this is a diagram of potential products that can be developed from hemp. So when we're thinking about the seeds, that can be transformed into baked goods, salad oil, body care, cosmetics, animal foods. You can think about the whole seed for birds, or you can think about pressing it into a cake for livestock, such as cows, pigs. We also are thinking about making the seed into acid-based dietary supplements and specialty industrial oils. When we think about the hemp bark, that can be used as Plastic mold products, which is a huge challenge that we're having right now with an influx of plastic in our market and in our environment. We can use the pulp to make specialty papers. We can even think about construction fiberboard. We can use them as we are thinking about landscaping and for coarse textiles, so any upholsteries or carpets in our homes. We can also think about the bark as fine textiles, so things that, you know, we keep in our homes that may be even more fancy. When we're thinking about the hemp industry, we can also use the woody stem core of the hemp product. So for animal bedding, for thermal installation, and for construction in general. We also can use the female flora for medicinal CBD, cannabinoids, for essential oils. That's huge right now. And insect repellent, people who like to hike and things like that, be outside with the animals. Also, we can use the entire plant for alcohol, totally viable here in Louisiana, and fuel. So we can really use many parts of the hemp plant for a larger production development. The model, when we're really thinking about Porter's contributions, is the supplier and the buyer. So we're going to talk about both. The supplier has a certain level of power that is determined by how easily it is for your suppliers to increase their prices. We're really starting to think about how many potential buyers do I have? How unique is the product or the service that they provide? How expensive would it be to switch from one supplier to another? The more that you have to choose from, the easier it will be to switch to a cheaper alternative. But the fewer suppliers there are, the more you need help and the stronger their position and ability to charge more. This can impact your overall profit. The third force identified by Porter is the bargaining power and input suppliers, vice versa, the negotiating position of a firm. The greater the bargaining power of a firm's suppliers, the greater is the threat to the firm's margin and ability to be profitable. In general, certification of seed strengthens the bargaining position of suppliers, as they can charge a real premium price for lower risk and lowered uncertainty that is a result of certification. So for hemp farmers, we're really thinking about how reliant this source is in terms of our inputs and whether or not price premiums are yet again a threat to our overall margins. But there are other factors that play in this newly emerging industry. Many CBD oil extractors and would-be marketers of CBD oil-based consumer products have recognized that their farmers are in need of high quality seeds and clones to produce and meet the demand for high volumes of CBD oil. This has created an alternative market arrangements that have been curtailed by some supplier bargaining power. Anecdotal evidence really has provided us with some examples of downstream firms contracting directly from the farmers, offering to supply seeds, and more importantly, to bear some of the production risks, either through crop share or through cost share arrangements. In some cases, farmers have even entered into contracts where farming arrangements in which they negotiated direct payment to their services, i.e. land, labor, or equipment to help grow their hemp. While their partner has supplied inputs and assumed most of the product's risk to retain ownership of the harvested crop. Hence, with these alternative market arrangements, some farmers have been able to curtail the bargaining power of others and thus have had to create a real management strategy for protecting profitable margins for their operations. The other aspect of the five forces model, which is number 4, is the buyer's power. So here you got to really ask yourself, how easy is it for the buyers to drive your prices down? How many buyers are there? How big are the orders? How much would it cost for them to switch from your product to services of the rival? Are buyers strong enough to really dictate terms to you? When you deal with only a few savvy customers, they have more power, but your power increases if you have a lot of customers. The 2019 hemp market presents a textbook example of bounded rationality, a market condition where the seller buyer are both trying to make market decisions with very incomplete and inadequate information. The history of a basic market benchmark is lacking, so expectations about prices, yields, and derived demand from downstream consumer markets are really difficult for hemp farmers to determine accurately. This was stated by Shepard and Mark in 2019. With imperfect information, the ability to really make good choices is impeded and mistakes will inevitably be made. But the burden of those mistakes will likely disproportionately really be borne onto the farmers. Given the tenfold increase in the market conditions in 2019 that have flipped from previous years, farmers are really competing for buyers. Any mistakes made during production and harvest will rest with the farmer. Is the THC level too high? That's really going to be a burden placed on farmers. And so buyers are legally obligated to seek other sellers. The farmers are left with a harvest that has no viable market. CBD production too low, buyers can find other farmers that have higher oil content in their plant biomass. While some farmers with raw product that has relatively low CBD content become a supplier for residual secondary market, their crop will be price discounted or not purchased at all. And even those farmers with a viable product are at a disadvantage. And there's a little information about market prices, which favor the buyers who, as market aggregators, are better positioned to gauge the market conditions, estimate demand, and opportunistically take advantage of the inadequate price information. The last force that Porter points out in the 5 forces model, when we're thinking specifically about the hemp industry, is our competitive rivalry. This looks at the number of strengths of your competitors. How many rivals do you have? Who are they? How does their quality of their product and services compare to ours? Where rivalry is intense, companies can attract customers with aggressive price cuts and high impact marketing campaigns. So in markets with a lot of rivals, your suppliers and buyers can go elsewhere. They feel that they're not getting a good deal from you. And on the other hand, where competitive rivalry is minimal and no one else is doing what you do, then you likely have a tremendous amount of strength and healthy profits. So really thinking about this in relationship to the hemp industry, specifically for Louisiana, we have to think about 4 different areas. So one is the use of high volume and low margin strategies. So thinking about the hemp industry, operators have reported the need to expand planted acres to remain competitive in pricing. When we think about the ability to control stock on hand, hemp industry operators must exercise supply chain and inventory management, ensuring that harvests do not sit in warehouses and spoil. When we think about effective product promotion, since all hemp is essentially substitutable, industry operators must work to differentiate their cultivation from other competitors. Lastly, when we start thinking about must complying with government regulations, industry farmers must comply with federal guidelines regarding the percent content of THC, an active chemical of marijuana, and their hemp harvest. Well, within their hemp harvest. And so shipments of over 0.3% of THC are actually considered illegal. When we think about our competitive landscape, there's 4 areas that we really need to think about. Profit. So despite high expectations, the industrial hemp production industry generates relatively low profits. Wages. So labor represents a largest cost for hemp production industry. So we need to take that into account. Purchases. While the industrial hemp production industry is relatively labor intensive industry, industrial farms incur moderate production costs and depreciation. The industrial hemp production industry has moderate to high depreciation costs due to the industry's high initial capital costs. Lastly, I want to note that in Porter's 1979 5 forces model, the basis of competition and rivalry among industry exists in firms that have direct effect. As noted by Porter in his analysis of the 5 forces model, the basis for competition and rivalry among the industry's existing firms have a direct effect on the firm's potential margins and profitability. If competition is primarily price-based, margins are squeezed as each firm attempts to capture market share by lowering prices while attempting to maintain margins by cutting costs. Alternatively, market rivalry can be based upon product differentiation, product service bundling, or other non-price market strategies. The emerging U.S. hemp market, in which the market demand has far exceeded available supply, rivalry has become much more focused on firms competing to secure input supplies and accessing post-harvest processing services. Demand for certified seeds and clones of specific feminized varieties has far exceeded supply, which has led and will likely continue to create problems for farmers looking to meet the market demand being driven by CBD oil craze. Supply shortages mean that farmers who can access these inputs will likely pay a higher price for them. The industrial hemp production industry exhibits a low level of market share concentration, such like the majority of the agricultural sector in the United States. No major player exhibited has recorded a market share greater than 5% in industry revenue. This is due to the fact that since 2018, this industry has become extremely saturated, with both the number of operators and the total acres planted soaring since then, which has diluted the individual operators' market share. Moreover, due to such strong increase in acreage, most major players have discussed the need to continue expanding acreage to remain competitive, which drives the unit of revenue per acres down, limiting industry players' returns. This is not expected to change or shift drastically in the next 5 years. However, it is worth noting that downstream CBD processing industry is highly concentrated, oftentimes with vertically integrated industry players consuming 100% of their hemp production in internal operations. Revenue earned from CBD processing is not included in this industry.
Now, okay, I am going to cover a pestle analysis that highlights the different factors that can impact the economics in the hemp industry. So in a pestle analysis, there's several different factors that come into play when looking at economical impacts. And those are political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and legal. With regards to political, these are all about how and to what degree a government intervenes in the economy. This can include government policy, political stability or instability, an overseas market, foreign trade policies, tax policies, labor law, environmental law, trade restrictions, and so on. So from the list above, it's clear that political factors often have an impact on organizations and how they do business. Organizations need to be able to respond to the current and anticipated future legislation and adjust their marketing policy accordingly. With regards to the economic factors, those have a significant impact on how an organization does business and how profitable they are. Economic factors include economic growth, interest rates, exchange rates, inflation, disposable income of consumers and businesses, and so on. Economic factors can be further broken down into macroeconomical and microeconomical factors. Macroeconomical factors deal with the management of demand in any given economy. Governments use interest rate control, taxation policy, and government expenditure as their main mechanisms they use for this. Microeconomic factors are all about the way people spend their incomes. This has a large impact on B2C organizations in particular. Social factors, also known as socioculture factors, are the areas that involve the shared belief and attitudes of a population. So these factors can include population growth, age distribution, health consciousness, career attitudes, and so on. These factors are of particular interest as they have a direct effect on how marketers understand customers and what drives them. Technological factors, so we all know how fast the technological landscape changes and how this impacts the way we market our products. Technological factors affect marketing and management thereof in 3 distinct ways: new ways of producing goods and services, new ways of distributing goods and services, new ways of communicating with target markets. I think it's also important to note too, in areas where technology is maybe in conflict or not able to be present in a certain economy. And we'll get to that specifically with hemp when we get to that slide. But I just wanted to also acknowledge that sometimes technology doesn't have a place in an emerging industry just because of the type of work involved. And so more on that later. Now with the environmental factors, these factors have only really come to the forefront in the last 15 years or so. They've become important due to the increasing scarcity of raw materials, pollution targets, doing business as an ethical and sustainable company, carbon footprint targets set by governments. This is also a good example of where one factor could be classified as political and environmental at the same time. These are just some of the issues marketers are facing within this factor. More and more consumers are demanding that the products they buy are sourced ethically and, if possible, from a sustainable source. And then the last with the pestle analysis is the legal factors. Legal factors include health and safety, equal opportunities, advertising standards, consumer rights and laws, products labeling, and product safety. It is clear that companies need to know what is and what is not legal in order to trade successfully. If an organization trades globally, this becomes a very tricky area to get right, as each country has its own set of rules and regulations. So now that we have an understanding of the different factors that go into a pestle analysis, let's look at some of the ways that each of these factors will present impacts on the emerging hemp economy in Louisiana. So the political factors. In 2018, there was a farm bill that amended the Controlled Substance Act and Agricultural Marketing Act of 1946 to address how industrial hemp is to be defined and regulated at the federal level. So what this did was it legalized hemp as an agricultural commodity while removing it from the list of controlled substances. So this amendment also directed the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation, the FCIC board, to streamline processes for developing hemp crop insurance policies, because prior to that, when hemp was listed as a controlled substance, it was uninsurable. This amendment will also direct the USDA to determine economic viability of a domestic hemp market. So all of this documentation is still emerging and being compiled as this industry is developing and emerging, not just in the US, but in Louisiana as well. And then this amendment also mandated that the state and the federal government would share regulatory authority over this issue, and outlining the steps that a state must take in order to develop a plan for the regulation of hemp as it fits under this Farm Bill amendment. And it also called out for the state plan to be submitted to the USDA for its approval. So now when we look at some different economic factors within the pestle analysis and how they impact the hemp industry in Louisiana, it's good to notice or to highlight again that the hemp industry is an emerging industry in Louisiana. There's not enough production records yet available to get a clear understanding of all the costs associated with hemp farming operations. This accurate data is needed for business planning and investment purposes, particularly when it comes to crop insurance. So there was a bill that passed in the Senate that included an amendment to ensure hemp farmers access to crop insurance prior to the 2020 growing season. This provision stated that the Federal Crop Insurance Corporation shall offer coverage under the Whole Farm Revenue Protection, WFRP, insurance policy for hemp by next year. Now, this whole farm revenue protection policies and historical revenue records must be presented for the farming operation. There's some hurdles for new procedures, though, as they will lack the sufficient production records needed in order to qualify requirements set forth for the policy purchase. So producers that were part of the 2014 Farm Bill's hemp pilot program will have those sufficient records on hand and revenue history for the whole farm policy. Producers that were part of the state or university research pilot, as authorized by the 2014 Farm Bill, can also get WFRP coverage for hemp. However, the majority of the people that are trying to get established in the hemp industry in Louisiana most likely did not fall underneath the guise of a state or university research program, and they most likely were not part of the pilot program. So those producers are going to have difficulty obtaining coverage until the USDA approved plan is in place. So, you know, these are just some of the little subtle factors that come into play when trying to take part in an emerging industry or just be successful in it, whether you were there at the ground floor or not. So that's an economic factor as it deals with crop insurance. Now let's get into the financial lending aspect of it. So hemp provides new opportunities for communities with an economic base involving agriculture. And this will create a need for such businesses to be able to access capital and financial services. So credit unions have a long and successful history of providing services to the agriculture sector. However, credit unions will need guidelines to better understand what they should be considering in providing financial services to lawfully operating hemp businesses. Laws and regulations are still relatively new at the federal level, and states are still trying to get in alignment with the federal regulations. So once all that's in place, then banking and lending guidelines will need to be built upon federal and state guidelines. The National Credit Union Administration, the NCUA, will issue additional guidance on this subject once the USDA's forthcoming regulations and guidelines are finalized. So all that's to say is, even though at a state level and at a federal level, we have legislation in place saying that it is legal to grow commercial hemp, there's all these other factors in place that still need to emerge and get aligned with and be, I guess, synergistic with the other factors in order to really ensure a successful economic impact for this industry. And these are just some of those little ways that, some of the factors rather that come into play. Okay, so now let's move on to some of the social factors that impact that. And remember, social factors have to do with shared beliefs and attitudes of a population. So those include population growth, age distribution, health consciousness, career attitudes, and so on. So those factors are of particular interest as they have a direct effect on how marketers understand customers and what drives them. So there is a stigma around hemp. There is a great confusion between hemp and cannabis. Are they the same thing? Are they different? They are different, specifically when it comes down to cannabinoid levels, but we're not here to dissect the science of the hemp and cannabis. We're just here to talk about the social factors that surround this emerging industry. So there is stigma around hemp. There's a negative image of cannabis portrayed in the media, and people naturally associate cannabis as being one and the same with hemp, and it's not the same. You know, as this industry slowly emerges and develops, there will be less stigma around that, and I think more education between the difference between hemp and cannabis. There's also a stigma around employment in this particular industry. And I think some folks believe, or rather are hesitant to get involved in this particular industry because they think that it might restrict future job opportunities, especially if that involves going into politics or law enforcement or any other traditional 9-to-5 job. Also, with this industry being so new in our particular region, you know, the companies that are popping up or the folks that are trying to get into the business, they haven't been around long enough to really establish brand recognition among their customers. So we have less than 70 grower licenses in this state within the past year. So this is giving them a relatively short time to establish brand recognition and loyalty. Again, you know, this speaks to the fact that this industry is new, it's emerging, there hasn't been enough time to go by to have a better understanding of the market needs, what the customer needs are, customer differentiation, brand differentiation. So social factors come into play with this too. You know, as more hemp startups enter the marketplace, entrepreneurs will face unique marketing challenges, especially when the promotion of the products is highly regulated within social media accounts that are routinely being shut down. So these are just some more of the subtleties that come into play when positioning yourself within this industry. So the technology factors that will impact the hemp industry in Louisiana. Hemp is a costly crop to grow, with labor being one of the most significant costs. Historically, hemp has been harvested by hand and hung in barns to air dry. This process is both slow and inefficient. And currently, there's no synthetic pesticides labeled for hemp use, making weed, insect, and disease control very labor intensive. So what we're getting at is this plant, because it doesn't have authorized pesticides or technology really emerging yet to offset the labor costs, the hands-on labor cost, it still kind of remains a really costly crop to get into. There's also a great deal of time and labor spent identifying male plants in greenhouses and in fields. The presence of male plants will drastically reduce CBD oil production in female plants. And if you're growing hemp specifically for, production of CBD oil, you will also need to regulate the amount of male plants that are present within that crop. To date, there's not a piece of technology that can do that for you. So this will definitely impact your costs, especially your labor costs for this particular crop. And additionally, there's no incentive right now to invest in technology. There are some farmers that have thought about converting or refitting their tobacco harvesting machines for hemp harvesting, particularly if they're getting into textiles, but that is costly. And there's currently no tax credits or insurance coverage to bolster that risk that a farmer might take in investing money for that technology upgrade. There's also no insurance coverage to recoup expenses for refitting a machine if the hemp production becomes inconsistent due to market volatility and the farmer thinks, well, I'm going to refit this machine to get back into tobacco production. So, without this kind of coverage or insurance around making these investments in technology to branch out into another kind of crop production, farmers are really less inclined or less motivated to spend money in that arena. So let's look at some environmental factors and how that impacts the hemp industry in Louisiana. Again, like I was saying, there's no herbicides that are currently labeled for hemp use. So that means that weed control is going to have to be manual. Now, soybean farmers will be unable to use hemp for a crop rotation due to hemp being affected by similar diseases and insect pests in the field. So hemp is usually praised for being such a great soil builder and as an option to use for crop rotation. But in Louisiana, where our number one row crop is soybean, we farm about 3.4 million acres of soybean a year. When that crop, soybean, shares the similar diseases and is also susceptible to the same insect pests as hemp is, you can't use those two crops for crop rotation. So again, there is no incentive for soybean farmers who are farming 3.4 million acres a year in Louisiana to incorporate hemp as part of their business model if that crop is not going to make the soil stronger after soybean. So there's that. Now, the projected use of hemp acreage thus far in the near future in Louisiana will be 80,000 acres. So you can see that vast difference in farming coverage between the two crops. It's also important to note that environmental stresses like drought, flooding, nutrient excess or deficiencies, heat and cold can result in THC spikes. So they call that the fields going hot. Again, there's no provision for crop insurance to mitigate this risk. So let's say you're growing hemp for CBD production. There is a percentage that your plant has to fall in for cannabinoid production to qualify for CBD. If due to environmental stresses, your hemp plant is producing more than what the regulations call for, then your plant is not going to qualify for that. And you would lose out on the ability to harvest and produce for CBD oil production. So what I'm saying is, if you plant in a field, you will be susceptible to environmental stresses that you can't necessarily manage by hand or have control over. As a result, your plant may not qualify to be able to be used for CBD oil due to excess THC production. So right now, knowing that about this plant, an insurance company may be less inclined to create coverage or may have restrictions on certain kind of coverage. And you as a farmer may not be able to recoup any lost expenses due to that too. So this is an example where there's a couple of different factors that are coming into play, economical and environmental, to impact this industry. Okay, and then let's look at some of the legal factors in Louisiana to wrap up our pestle analysis. Now, the Louisiana House Bill 491 was signed into law by Governor John Bel Edwards on June 6, 2019, recognizing industrial hemp as an agricultural commodity in Louisiana. Now, there are 4 types of licensing overseen by the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, LDAF, and that is a grower license, processor license, seed producer, and contract carrier. Now, these legal factors and these licenses, it's an extensive and expensive permitting process. Farmers can't have any felony convictions in the last decade or any drug convictions in the last 2 decades. There's other agencies that are also involved in the oversight of the hemp industry in addition to the LDAF. And that is the Louisiana Department of Health, the LDH, and they're responsible for developing rules and regulations for industrial hemp-derived CBD products. And they will provide the oversight to the manufacturing, packaging, and labeling processes, or the processor license, rather. And then the Louisiana Office of Alcohol and Tobacco Control, the ATC, they will also promulgate rules related to the regulations of cannabinoid product sales, CBD product sales. And each business is going to be required to have a permit from the ATC for each location prior to CBD retail sale. So these are more agencies that are having to get their rules and regulations together, so that way they're in alignment with the Louisiana House Bill 491 to be in alignment with the Farm Bill that the federal government has passed. So again, not everything has been developed. Some things are still in motion or in the works, and it makes it a little difficult to effectively integrate and get started in this industry. Each crop will be closely monitored by state regulators. The THC levels, sensitive to environmental factors, affect crop eligibility for various products, insurance coverage, and financing. And we talked about that on previous slides, the economic, environmental, and now legal factors too. So I'm hoping that after this pestle analysis, you can see the ways in which all of these different factors really are interrelated, and there's a balance that is struck when it comes to being mindful of everything that comes into play when thinking about either getting into this particular industry or being successful in this industry. With that, I'm going to close with my section of the presentation and pass it on to my next teammate. Thank you so much for listening.
On this slide, we're looking at a breakdown of the 2020 hemp industry product distribution and the revenue created for each product. We start with the hemp-based CBD, which accounts for 23%, about 130 million. CBD is the oil that's produced from the leaves and stalks of the hemp plant. It has therapeutic and health benefits, and this is also the industry's highest margin segment, and it's the largest contributor to revenue. Next are personal care products at 22%, 125 million. This includes soaps, conditioners, balms, creams, etc. And it's predicted as more people are aware of the benefits of CBD, more people will consume these products. Next is industrial applications at 18%, 102 million. This includes the production of hemp paper products and sanitary items. This is considered to be more environmentally friendly than traditional production methods, which in turn has increased its popularity. Next is food products at 17%, 96 million. The main food product is hemp seed. Hemp seeds are viewed as a health food. They're eaten raw or roasted and can be pressed into edible oil and milk. Consumer textiles accounts for 13% at 73 million. Now this includes hemp fabric, which is used to make clothes, rope, and shoes, for example. Next is supplements at 5%. So this includes hemp oil and other dietary supplements. People consider this to have nutritional benefits, and however, it is a small product segment. So most of these segments are expected to rise over the next 5 years. With the increase in the consumer demand for CBD, this will also increase industry revenue. And consumer demand is also increased when per capita income increases. Now, considering COVID-19, we can probably see a change in the mix of these product segments. With the economic downturn, it's likely to cause a decrease in revenue. People will most likely limit their discretionary purchases. So things such as personal care products are considered more discretionary. So we can see that industry possibly decrease and other industries increase in its place. This slide shows the gross revenue for the hemp industry, as well as the inventory valuation adjustment, which is referred to as IVA. The IVA is an adjustment that's made to corporate profits and to income in order to remove the inventory profits. So that's considered more like a capital gain than it is profits from the current production. When hemp production was legalized under the 2018 Farm Bill, we saw many companies start growing hemp in huge growths. That is expected to stabilize a bit more over the next 5 years. A lot of companies continue to have challenges post-legalization. The demand for hemp has also created an oversupply. So this resulted in a huge price decrease of hemp and decreases the company profits. So companies that were expected to turn a quick profit are most likely going to exit the industry, but it will leave the ones that are better suited for the market conditions as active players. Over the next 5 years until 2025, it's predicted that the industry revenue will grow about 4% each year. This slide shows us the industry's production data in terms of percentage change over the years. Because of stringent regulations, the industry hasn't really been allowed to develop well until recently. And you can see here there's a huge amount of growth in the last 5 years. The 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp as a Schedule I controlled substance, and now it's viewed more as a regular agricultural commodity. In this graph, we can see the percentage change increase in various sectors due to this. Overall, the industry rose at a rate of 157.1% over the last 5 years until 2020. So while the demand for hemp products is high, as I mentioned before, the quick growth resulted in an oversupply of hemp, and that in turn decreased the price of hemp significantly. In 2020, the profit is only expected to account for 5.8% of the industry revenue. The industry also has high operating costs, and growers struggled to bring the hemp to market due to regulations. This deters investors and new entrants to the market, which is the reason why we see the growth decrease in 2020. As I mentioned in the previous slide, is expected for the market to stabilize over the next 5 years with modest growth. This slide shows us the percentage change in key external drivers of the hemp industry from 2012. So although they're not directly related to the hemp industry, these factors can influence it significantly. So the first one is aggregate private investment. This is a measure of the total investment by individuals or businesses. The hemp industry has had high levels of investment from venture capital and other companies. And as investment level rises, the industry is likely to grow. As I mentioned previously, in 2020, the aggregate private investment is expected to decline, and which can in turn pose a threat to the industry. Next is per capita disposable income. This measures the person's ability to pay for goods and services after taxes and savings. If your disposable income increases, you can afford higher priced items and discretionary items. So for example, items made with CBD. In 2020, per capita disposable income is expected to rise, which presented an opportunity for the industry. However, with COVID-19, we could see a different impact in the reverse way. Next is demand for medical or recreational marijuana. So in the last 5 years, more states have begun legalizing medical or recreational marijuana. Now, although hemp doesn't have the same effects as marijuana does, the psychoactive effects, the two are often associated, and when there's a higher regulation of marijuana, there tends to be a higher regulation of hemp. However, as people become more comfortable with marijuana, use it more, the regulation of the industrial hemp is likely to fall, and it'll lead to greater demand. In 2020, demand for medical and recreational marijuana growing is expected to rise. Next is per capita expenditure on alcohol. So many people use alcohol as a means of entertainment or relaxing. Some drinks such as red wine are considered to possibly have health benefits. The demand for CBD is similar because CBD is also believed to help people relax and to have health benefits and therapeutic benefits. As a result, when the demand for alcohol rises, usually the demand for hemp-based products is also likely to rise. In 2020, the per capita expenditure on alcohol is expected to grow, and I'd imagine more so due to COVID-19. On this slide, we're looking at a breakdown of the 2020 hemp industry product distribution and the revenue created for each product. We start with the hemp-based CBD, which accounts for 23%, about 130 million. CBD is the oil that's produced from the leaves and stalks of the hemp plant. It has therapeutic and health benefits, and this is also the industry's highest margin segment, and it's the largest contributor to revenue. Next are personal care products at 22%, 125 million. This includes soaps, conditioners, balms, creams, etc. And it's predicted as more people are aware of the benefits of CBD, more people will consume these products. Next is industrial applications at 18%, 102 million. This includes the production of hemp paper products and sanitary items. This is considered to be more environmentally friendly than traditional production methods, which in turn has increased its popularity. Next is food products at 17%, 96 million. The main food product is hemp seed. Hemp seeds are viewed as a health food. They're eaten raw or roasted and can be pressed into edible oil and milk. Consumer textiles accounts for 13% at 73 million. Now this includes hemp fabric, which is used to make clothes, rope, and shoes, for example. Next is supplements at 5%. So this includes hemp oil and other dietary supplements. People consider this to have nutritional benefits, however, it is a small product segment. So most of these segments are expected to rise over the next 5 years. With the increase in the consumer demand for CBD, this will also increase industry revenue. And consumer demand is also increased when per capita income increases. Now, considering COVID-19, we can probably see a change in the mix of these product segments. With the economic downturn, it's likely to cause a decrease in revenue. People will most likely limit their discretionary purchases. So things such as personal care products are considered more discretionary. So we can see that industry possibly decrease and other industries increase in its place. This slide shows the gross revenue for the hemp industry, as well as the inventory valuation adjustment, which is referred to as IVA. The IVA is an adjustment that's made to corporate profits and to income in order to remove the inventory profits. So that's considered more like a capital gain than it is profits from the current production. When hemp production was legalized under the 2018 Farm Bill, we saw many companies start growing hemp in huge growths. That is expected to stabilize a bit more over the next 5 years. A lot of companies continue to have challenges post-legalization. The demand for hemp has also created an oversupply. So this resulted in a huge price decrease of hemp and decreases the company profits. So companies that were expected to turn a quick profit are most likely going to exit the industry, but I believe the ones that are better suited for the market conditions as active players. Over the next 5 years until 2025, it's predicted that the industry revenue will grow about 4% each year. This slide shows us the industry's production data in terms of percentage change over the years. Because of stringent regulations, the industry hasn't really been allowed to develop well until recently. And you can see here there's a huge amount of growth in the last 5 years. The 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp as a Schedule I controlled substance, and now it's viewed more as a regular agricultural commodity. In this graph, we can see the percentage change increase in various sectors due to this. Overall, the industry rose at a rate of 157.1% over the last 5 years until 2020. So while the demand for hemp products is high, as I mentioned before, the quick growth resulted in an oversupply of hemp, and that in turn decreased the price of hemp significantly. In 2020, the profit is only expected to account for 5.8% of the industry revenue. The industry also has high operating costs, and growers struggled to bring the hemp to market due to regulations. This deters investors and new entrants to the market, which is the reason why we see the growth decrease in 2020. As I mentioned in the previous slide, is expected for the market to stabilize over the next 5 years with modest growth. This slide shows us the percentage change in key external drivers of the hemp industry from 2012. So although they're not directly related to the hemp industry, these factors can influence it significantly. So the first one is aggregate private investment. This is a measure of the total investment by individuals or businesses. The hemp industry has had high levels of investment from venture capital and other companies. And as investment level rises, the industry is likely to grow. As I mentioned previously, in 2020, the aggregate private investment is expected to decline, and which can in turn pose a threat to the industry. Next is per capita disposable income. This measures the person's ability to pay for goods and services after taxes and savings. If your disposable income increases, you can afford higher priced items and discretionary items. So for example, items made with CBD. In 2020, per capita disposable income is expected to rise, which presented an opportunity for the industry. However, with COVID-19, we could see a different impact in the reverse way. Next is demand for medical or recreational marijuana. So in the last 5 years, more states have begun legalizing medical or recreational marijuana. Now, although hemp doesn't have the same effects as marijuana does, the psychoactive effects, the two are often associated, and when there's a higher regulation of marijuana, there tends to be a higher regulation of hemp. However, as people become more comfortable with marijuana, use it more, the regulation of the industrial hemp is likely to fall, and it'll lead to greater demand. In 2020, demand for medical and recreational marijuana growing is expected to rise. Next is per capita expenditure on alcohol. So many people use alcohol as a means of entertainment or relaxing. Some drinks such as red wine are considered to possibly have health benefits. The demand for CBD is similar because CBD is also believed to help people relax and to have health benefits and therapeutic benefits. As a result, when the demand for alcohol rises, usually the demand for hemp-based products is also likely to rise. In 2020, the per capita expenditure on alcohol is expected to grow, and I'd imagine more so due to COVID-19.
Hey, so moving on, so we kind of wanted to do a more focused analysis of how industrial hemp production can affect Louisiana's economy. So I'm going to specifically talk about that, and I'm going to be drawing from a study from the LSU Agriculture Center. It's by Michael Diliberto, who's a professor of agricultural economics and aggregate business. And so secondly, we're going to talk about the methodology. So how did they use the data? Where did they source the data that they use to make these kinds of projections about the effect of industrial hemp production on Louisiana's economy? And so we've talked about this a little bit previously in the presentation, but we're going to look at 3 different sectors. And there's some tables that I'm going to be talking about later. But we're looking at fiber, which is grain and straw production, certified seed production. So this is production of hemp seeds. And then CBD oil, which has the largest projected gross revenue. Fourthly, we're going to talk about the limitations of the data, of the scope of the data. And then I just wanted to kind of do a little industry comparison. So we're going to talk a little bit about the job market opportunities for like revenues, for the ways that revenues can be used from the industrial hemp production. All right. So the methodology, I want to talk a little bit about the methodology that Michael used in his study. So as a model, as a theoretical model to drive the analysis, he used impact analysis for planning. So this is a specific type of software that people use, that scientists use to make inference about economic impacts. And then so the data that we're using, that he used, was from SPINS, which is a State of the National Industry Report. And so from these analyses that Michael did, or Dr. Diliberto, he found an economic multiplier of $2.16. So basically what this means is that for every dollar of hemp-related agricultural output, there's an estimated increase of $2.16 in total economic activity across all economic sectors within Louisiana. So this is just bare minimum, the economic activity that would be produced, but this isn't counting like entrepreneurial uses of CBD oil or the other types of uses of hemp in other markets. All right. So this is scope of assessment, as mentioned earlier. And so this is one of the tables. This is the economic impact of industrial hemp production in Louisiana. And so we have some different tables here. So he did some kind of projections. Since hemp production hasn't fully taken off all the way in Louisiana, it's kind of difficult to make any kinds of inferences about the possible projected economic potential. But this is based on the number of acres that would be allocated. So with the 2018 Farm Bill, whenever they start doing more experimentation with industrial hemp production, they basically said, like, we're going to allocate, if we grew this in Louisiana, we would allocate between 200 and 1,000 acres. And so we see the maximum from this would be $600,000 from 1,000 acres. So I'm only paying attention to the maximums, basically. So this is for certified seed production. So this would be producing the unique types of seeds that would be used for the materials that they build from the industrial hemp production. And so we see that this largest potential revenue could be 1.05 million. And so this is the one that I really want to pay attention to, because CBD oil has been used pretty innovatively by different entrepreneurs in the market. And we see that this has the highest potential gross revenue at $105 million. It's a lot of money. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the limitations of the study before doing an industry comparison. So it is difficult to track sources of revenue from hemp production. So for instance, they don't really track the type of hemp that is the hemp products that are sold in stores like the Body Shop or Whole Foods. So that would be something that wouldn't necessarily be accounted for. This is just straight up like hemp production in farms. And then also yield uncertainty is another factor that could be limiting for the ability to project the economic impact of hemp, because there's uncertainty around the structure of contracts for marketing industrial hemp, especially around CBD production. And then there are also highly variable returns for the individual who's growing hemp. So from season to season, there could be different types of yields, and we see that this is accounted for in the different values in this chart. All right, so I thought this would be kind of fun, just looking at some industry comparisons. So I wanted to look at the food preparation and serving related occupations, and specifically New Orleans, because that kind of employs a lot of people in the state and the city. So this revenue that is gained from hemp production, industrial hemp production, could be used for potential jobs for residents of Louisiana and residents of New Orleans. And so let's take a closer look. Okay, good. So industry comparison. So this information is from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so this is for the New Orleans Metairie area. And accordingly, there are 84,330 employees in the service, food preparation and serving related industry. And the average per hour wage is not very much at $11.84. And so we see an average mean wage per year of $24,000. Like, can you even feed a family on that? I mean, a lot of people do. But so we see total wages paid is $2.08 billion. So this is the, again, the amount of wages that are paid to people who are in the food service industry. And I think New Orleans population is around like 300,000 people. So this is a pretty significant number that are employed in the service industry. So let's look back at these values. According to the projected gross revenue of industrial hemp production for CBD oil, this could yield $226 million on 1,000 acres. And that's just 1.5 square miles, which is not very much at all. And so this revenue could be a very sizable potential job market. So 226 million is approximately 10% of 2.08 billion. And this is thinking about the ways that they could use this projected gross revenue of industrial hemp production, of industrial hemp produced CBD oil, but this isn't accounting for the different markets that CBD oil could enter into, as far as wellness markets, as far as like health related markets, all of that. So this is kind of just a very low approximation, but this is a pretty high number. And I think it shows that there is a lot of potential in the job market for industrial hemp, specifically as it relates to CBD oil. And we already gave you kind of like a rundown of the different products that come from hemp. All right, so in conclusion, we gave y'all a lot of information today. So we talked about the difference between hemp versus marijuana. And so we see that hemp is actually used for like structural materials. So like you can use hemp for a variety of different means. And so we hope that we kind of dispelled any kinds of like stereotypes that you had about hemp. It is it's a very, very useful material, and it's very eco-friendly. And so we also saw some of the ways that policy and government regulation affect the ability for us to even understand the potential economic impact of hemp, industrial hemp production in the United States. And we gave you kind of a little bit of data on hemp production and the impacts that it's had in the US in general. But again, we are limited in our scope to do this analysis because it hasn't been fully introduced in Louisiana. And so some future research could be really interesting as far as the ways that they use the tax revenue that's generated from industrial hemp production. A lot of people do use it for like innovative social impact programming. So for instance, there's ways that people have used it to help people who were formerly incarcerated get jobs in a certain industry. So there's a lot of really interesting ways that people are thinking about using the tax revenue that can be generated from industrial hemp production. And so here's a little bit about our sources. And yeah, thank you for tuning in.